Rock's Sebek is described to have used a very special fighting style, where the slashes from his sword were said to be like blasts from a cannon. His swordsmanship has now been shown several times throughout this flashback, where the clash between him and Harald was said to eradicate everything within a 5-kilometer radius in the Holy Land. Years after this bout, Sebek seemingly leveled up his sword fighting considerably, where during his rematch with Harald, Sebek is able to completely blast the strongest king in Elbaf's history away. He then only continues showing how impressive his swordplay is on God Valley, where Sebek with his sword is able to even dominate an immortal like Saint Garling, but also to clash with the other strongest figures of his era. Even though he's only appeared in a few chapters, Sebek has shown that he pretty much possesses one of the most devastating and useful fighting styles in all of One Piece. Yet, I do not think he's the only character in this story with this style. There is actually one other character in the manga who uses his sword the exact same way as Sebek, but it's actually a character we've known since chapter 1. I believe that the Pirate King, Goldie Roger, at some point stole Sebek's fighting style from him. But not only this, I also think that this style was also later adopted by Shanks, who still uses it to this very day. One overlooked part about Goldie Roger's character is that he is very much a thief in every sense of the word. We've now witnessed Roger's role in the God Valley incident, but what's actually pretty funny are how mundane his reasons are for coming to this island in the first place, where Roger only got involved to steal Shaggy and the Celestial Dragon's treasure. This is however by no means a new addition to Roger's character, but something we've known about him since the very first volumes. All the way back in Buggy's backstory, the flashback actually opens with a scene of Roger's crew stealing another ship's treasure. This was actually the event that ultimately led to Buggy eating his devil fruit, where the Barabara no Mi was just something the Roger pirates had found among their loot. When the story years later reveals how Roger gathered the 4 road poneglyphs, what we also discover is that Roger did not even bother to fight Big Mom, but simply snuck into her treasure room and stole a rubbing of her poneglyph. Stealing is pretty much the running theme with almost every other adventure we hear from the Roger pirates. Roger and Rayleigh began their pirating career with a stolen ship. Kaban immediately gets excited when he hears that the Straw Hats are going to steal from the Giants. Buggy's entire purpose in life revolves around stealing treasure, and Shanks even put the entire One Piece story in motion by stealing the Nika fruit from the world government. I should however note that Roger also forbade his crew from stealing from civilians, yet stealing from other pirates was clearly perfectly okay in his book. I also think that the list of Roger's victims may well have included Rock's Sebek, except that Roger didn't actually steal anything material. The first time the manga ever shows Goldie Roger fight is in the Oden flashback, when Oden comes charging at Roger. Roger pulls out his sword and performs a shockwave slash that sends Oden flying back through several gigantic trees. Oden himself has no idea what hit him, but I think that us readers have actually seen this sword fighting style more than once. If I compare this scene to this other scene where Sebek attacks Harald, there is an uncanny resemblance. Just like with Roger, even though it's a sword attack, Sebek's strike is also a shockwave that can even send a giant like Harald flying backwards, which, just like when Roger attacked Oden, ends up destroying the surrounding environment. What is also noteworthy is that when performing their attacks, Roger and Sebek do the exact same pose, where they swing their weapon more like a bat than a sword. By the way, now that you've watched the video this far, you should definitely click subscribe, because I'm historically active with my uploads at the moment, so you would get a lot of new One Piece content in your subscription feed. One Piece has at this point introduced us to dozens of different swordsmen, yet very few actually have this kind of fighting style, where almost all of the sword strikes performed in the manga are slashes, not shockwaves. One of the closest parallels to Roger and Sebek's style actually comes from Fujitora, who's also able to create these massive blasts with his sword. However, unlike Roger and Sebek, Fujitora is able to do this because of his devil fruit power, whereas what the other two are using is pure haki. Honestly, I do not think the character with the fighting style most similar to Sebek and Roger is Fujitora, but actually Shanks. When Shanks clashes with Kid, he performs the Divine Departure, the exact move Roger did on Oden, and this does the exact same thing as Roger and Sebek strikes, where it blows Kid away. if you want to use it as a source, this was made even more explicit in the anime, where Kid gets thrown through the masts of his ship, just like how Roger blasted Oden through the trees on the island where they fought. I think there is also an argument that Shanks' fighting style is actually closer to Sebek's than it is to Roger's. When Shanks attacked Kid, it created a literal explosion on Kid's ship. We saw this exact same thing in One Piece chapter 1157, with his attack also creating this kind of explosion. Granted, this could also just be nothing, where just to mention the anime's depiction again, its interpretation of the explosion wasn't due to Shanks' haki, but because Kid's weapon and his ship's gunpowder ignited. There is still, however, the bigger point of this video, which is that among all One Piece swordsmen, Sebek, Roger and Shanks share an incredibly similar fighting style. I also think the explanation for this could actually come from how Oda described how Shanks learned how to fight. In a special One Piece 2024 Q&A, Oda revealed that Roger did not actually teach Divine Departure to Shanks, but that Shanks mimicked this on his own. Copying another swordsman's style is something we've seen the most skilled swordsmen in One Piece are able to do. While he was traveling with the Straw Hats, Zoro was actually able to copy Kinemon's Firefox style, which he later used against Kaido and Big Mom on Onigashima. Shanks' own swordplay is said to be second only to Mihawk's, so it makes a lot of sense that he, above anyone else on the Roger Pirates, was able to copy Roger's techniques. However, if Shanks was talented enough to mimic Roger's style, I think it is a very good bet that Roger himself was also at a level where he himself could copy the swordplay of even the strongest characters. Even though Roger's connection with Sebek is mainly remembered for the God Valley incident, the story actually reveals that the two had been bitter rivals for years before this day. The narrator even says that the only time when the two met and did not fight each other was when they were at Shaki's bar. If Roger and Sebek did indeed have several classes throughout their lives, I think that if Roger is even half the swordsman he appears to be, it is very believable that a tried and true thief like him would have done something like stealing Sebek's way of using a sword. Granted, this is not however an airtight theory. While I used Fujitora as my example before, there are still other non-Devil Fruit user swordsmen in the story who have actually shown similar attacks as Roger and Sebek. I think the best example are actually the Giants of Elbaf, where regardless of them using swords, axes or any other weapons that they can get their hands on, Elbaf's fighting style revolves around the giants blasting their enemies away with shock waves. This style was also seemingly copied by Big Mom, who is to date the only non-giant able to perform Elbaf's techniques, which at least to me really builds up Lin Lin's own level as a sword master. What the giants are seemingly doing are essentially air blasts, but there is a big difference between this and what Roger and Sebek are doing, whose swordplay actually revolves around haki, but more specifically, Conqueror's haki. Personally, I think this is the real key to how Sebek fights. One Piece has now for years shown that potent Conqueror's haki is actually so strong that it is able to blast away the environment. I think this is exactly what Sebek, Roger and Shanks are doing, where they're essentially just doing Conqueror's haki blasts with their swords. This is not something that automatically happens if a character imbues their sword with Conquerors, where for example, Zoro's Conqueror's haki attacks are still mainly slashes. But interestingly, we see that even Zoro is able to create these Conqueror's haki shockwaves with his swords. In this sense, this theory could certainly still be false, where creating shockwaves with a sword could essentially just be a basic skill for a swordsman with Conqueror's haki, and not a special style invented by Sebek. We've even seen someone like Rayleigh fight like this in this very flashback. Still, maybe it's just me, but the way the manga has depicted both Roger and Sebek fighting is to me just uncanny. There's none of the finesse we see with someone like Mihawk here, where Sebek and Roger hack away at their opponents like barbarians. But the idea I like even more is that Roger really is an outlaw to the bone. This could basically be the missing piece of the puzzle, with Roger's wealth, fame and power. We already know all of his wealth as a pirate was stolen from others. We also know that Roger's biggest claim to fame was also stolen, where he claimed the One Piece to be his treasure, even though in reality, it was Joy Boy's treasure. The only part about Roger's reputation that has not yet been confirmed to be stolen was his power, but it could also be that even the swordplay Roger used to conquer the seas was just something he stole from his rival. There would be a good bit of wisdom here, which is that if you are going to steal, You should probably steal from the best. I however actually mean this in a very literal sense. I honestly believe that based on what we learned in this flashback, Roger was the weaker of these two men. If you're interested, you should click here to see why. Rocksteady back in his demon form was a monster that Goldie Roger never actually surpassed. Thanks a lot to all my members for fittingly letting me steal their bounty, but also a special thanks to all new members who've joined recently. As always, big thanks to all of you who watched to the end. I hope you make a habit of it.